All right, let's take a look at the first steps of this quadratic project. To recap, I gave you this code as a starting point, and then I want you guys to improve it. For example, it will solve a quadratic function if everything goes right. So 1, 6, and 8, for example. There's no issue. It gives you solutions. They're good. No problem. But what if you type something that's not an integer? It doesn't like it because it's expecting an integer. What if you type something that's not a number? It doesn't like that for the same reason. What if you get integers that work, but it ends up in the course of this line trying to take the square root of a negative, and it doesn't know how to do that yet, so it gets stuck in that way. We want to fix these, or at least avoid these. So let's see how we might think of that. For the first issue where I tried to put a decimal, we could just change this to say float instead of int, and then we could work with those. But I'm fine with keeping it integers. That's how we'll almost always see it in math class. You'll have the coefficients as integers, and that's fine. And that wouldn't solve our other problem anyway, where they put something that's not a number. So let's just handle that part first, and then we can always change it to deal with decimals in the future. What I'd like to do is some kind of while loop. Maybe when they enter something that's no good, we ask them to go again. And inside that, you might have a try except when you try to convert it to an int or a float. We can change it later and see what happens. That is something we've done a lot all the way since Q1, and we should be prepared. However, you don't want to do it 3 times, right? You don't want to have that while loop, try except, and then have another one, and then have another one. So what I would recommend is spinning that off into a function, and then you can call up that function whenever you need it and reuse the code instead of rewrite the code. Think about that. Another error we got was this part when it tries to take the square root of this, which, by the way, is called the discriminant. Every famous math function will have a name for the different parts because people have had to talk about it. And usually those names will be Latin-based or Latin-sounding, because that's how people wrote about math until pretty recently. So this discriminant could be negative, totally fine. Often what that means in a graph sense is that the parabola is just a little too high and it never dips down to touch the axis. It's not any crazy situation that you can't imagine. But how can we handle that? Well, we could do try except again, because it was giving us a value error when we did that. I think as long as C is huge, it'll do it, right? Yeah. So the value error could happen, but I would probably head it off before it even gets there. It might say something like, this thing, I want to give it a name because I don't want to mention that. I don't want to type that a lot. You can call it discriminant, and then you can mention discriminant, and you won't have to type this long thing, and the computer won't have to calculate this thing. You might even shorten it so you don't have to type as much, but the full name is sometimes nice to have. So you could say, like, if, it's hard to type though, if discriminant less than 0, do something, else do this stuff, and then we can catch it before it gets there. And the good version of this, the good point about this, is that we can update it later. At first, you can just say, you know, sorry, buddy, we can't handle that right now. And then later you can actually handle it. If you guys have gone through a math class, probably Algebra 2, that discusses imaginary numbers and complex numbers, then you know that we can do square root of a negative. We just have to add another layer to it. That's not a requirement for this assignment, though. You just have to catch it and say, you know what, that involves taking the square root of a negative, and we're not ready for that yet. Please try again, or something. So don't be worried if you haven't covered that in your math class. But the idea is we want to give things names so that we can mention them and not have to do all this stuff. We want to give functions names so we can mention them and not have to type it 3 times. I want to generally make stuff reusable instead of just doing all the work for one specific instance. That's going to be your challenge for this, because a lot of stuff happens 3 times or 2 times or often even more.